Welcome back to the Fapstinence podcast, where we're trying to find freedom from porn. Recapping last episode with Kevin, we were talking about, is porn even really a problem? Some of the numbers behind all that, the staggering numbers behind how much porn is being consumed and by how many people, and how much is actually being put out there into the world. It's like if you had a drink in front of you all the time as an alcoholic, you couldn't step away from it. It's there everywhere, and it's causing a lot of people to deal with addictive tendencies. We talked about dopamine, and we also talked about different areas of your brain that are being affected by porn consumption. That's a little bit of a recap of the last episode. Now we're going to be talking about who is affected by porn, and Kevin's going to start with the personal here, the you.
Yep. So it's my personal belief that, and a personal philosophy of mine, that everything kind of comes back to you, your self-image. Your self-image, the way you view yourself, is going to affect your ability to help others and the way you view others as well, because you are a human being at the end of the day. We all consciously know we're human beings. So if you're treating yourself like shit, I'll bleep that out if we need to. If you're treating yourself like crap, then you're going to, you're a human being. You're treating a human being like crap. Therefore, you're going to treat other people like crap as well.
Right.
But we're going to get into relationships with others first. More so, let's talk about your relationship with yourself and how it affects you. So I'm a big fan of self-image psychology. One of my favorite books of all times is Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. Highly suggest everyone reads that. But so something that Dr. Maltz talks about in his book is it's all about self-image, right? And you can create a new self-image of yourself, and your self-image is your way of making sense of this crazy world that we live in. Your actions are going to be congruent with who you view yourself as. So if you view yourself as the type of person who, watches porn all the time, or is a slave to his or her impulses, that's going to affect how you view yourself, obviously. And it's really, really important when it comes to just when you're watching people engage in an activity that you wish that you were engaging in, because when it comes to pornography, it's purely just fantasy. It really is. It's seeing scenarios that typically either you would want to be, you want to be in that position of what that man is experiencing on video, or sometimes even worse, where we're talking about like going into voyeurism, for example, like you get turned on just watching other people just for the sake of you're not getting it, right? It starts to pervert your views on sex and your views on yourself and your relationship with that, right? So it starts to become like really, really dangerous. And when it comes to actually changing these things, which we'll get into in our segment later, it's really important to create a new self-image of yourself in terms of doing that. But your self-image slowly gets damaged over time when you're addicted to anything. If anything has power over you, especially something as powerful as sex.
Right.
So what you have some thoughts on that to add?
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack, but I think the words that come to my mind a lot when it comes to porn and porn addiction are the words objectification, and also that's a big word that sticks out to me, because accountability is another one that pops up. Objectification and accountability, that was the word I was looking for, because you're mentioning some of these scenarios, they're not based in reality. Just as we're seeing that social media, just as an entity, is unhealthy for human beings because you're basing and comparing your life experiences to other people's, well, you're finding out that your favorite influencer actually isn't happy all the time. They're just happy when they're recording themselves being happy, right? If you're watching your favorite influencer out there in the Bahamas having an amazing time, out traveling the world, and you're thinking about how you're sitting at home and not doing what you want to do, you're going to feel pretty unhappy about that, right? Well, if you start comparing yourself to these fantasy worlds with the way that people treat each other in these fantasy worlds, human beings do not operate in that way. And if you try to do that in real life, oftentimes it's not going to work. It's going to be rape. It's going to be sexual assault. It's going to be violent. It's going to be incestual. The kind of things that are promoted as desirable and actually appealing in porn. If you haven't been watching porn for a while, it's very jarring. I think that's something that if you're a regular porn user, you're going to notice that you're more and more and more exposed to more and more extreme things. But the way that that works, we talked about it with dopamine, you need more extreme stimulus. But the kind of things you're seeing are not objectively normal. They're not healthy either. And so I think what you start to do is you start to look at yourself and what you can get from other people's as a primary motivator for everything. And I think that's why it's so self-centered and there's no accountability surrounding it, that you start to look at even your boss or someone else, not necessarily as a sexual object, but as somebody to use, something to use, okay? What can you give me? What are you doing for me right now? What do you have to offer? If that's not something I want, why would I have the time of day for you? You do not have value to me. I think you start to see these kind of tendencies coming out because just by the very nature of the source material, you are objectifying. It is a person on the other side of the screen. How often do you look at a porn model or somebody else as a person? When you meet somebody in person, they have a name, a real name, not Candy or something like that. I'm sorry to all the Candies in the world, maybe. I shouldn't have said that just now.
The Candies and the Stacys.
But oh my gosh, I feel so bad. That was a bad example.
No, it's fun.
But the point being, they have a name, they have a job, they have intrinsic value, they have a personality. When you're watching somebody on the screen doing the things that they're doing, you don't care about who they are or what they want out of life or what their goal is or like how they pay rent or like, what their favorite color is or whatever. You just care about what they can give you. And honestly, I would guess most people, and myself included, when I used to watch porn, you don't think of them as human beings. You just think of them as something that looks very attractive, that it has something to offer you with no accountability required.
Yep. Absolutely. You just look at them as objects of pleasure. And one other thing too, when it comes to, and you brought up a great point, Peter, about how the way that you view others will significantly get affected because of that. But I want to circle back really quick to your specific relationship with yourself. And then we're going to move on to a little bit more of the things that you were just talking about there. But when it comes to your relationship with yourself, when you view, when you're watching porn and then you do the deed and then afterwards in your post-orgasm bliss, no one feels good.
Bliss is not the right word.
Yeah, it's not bliss. Yeah, and you post-orgasm, whatever you want to call it. Shame.
It's
yes.
Madness. If you wanted to give it a pop culture.
Yeah. It sucks. Like nobody feels good after that, and the reason is because you just viewed something that you feel shameful about because you feel like you didn't earn it. Sex is a beautiful, awesome thing, whether you look at it from a religious lens, from a secular lens, it doesn't matter. We all agree that sex is for the most part a good thing. It's the reason that we're all here. So if you kind of went in this perverse way of doing that, and it's beautiful because it's, in a way, it helps to procreate, it helps to connect human beings. When you just had the sexual experience with just yourself and this fantasy of other people, it's natural that you're going to feel weird afterwards. So that brings down your self-image of yourself. And because of that, you're going to traverse through life naturally a lot less confident because you're not confident in you. your confidence is always going to be a reflection of how you view yourself, how you view your value to the world. And it's so easy for that to be tarnished with regular porn viewing habits, much less the actual psychological things that are going on with your dopamine being drained. It's just how you view yourself. That confidence just in and of itself on its own is going to be super tarnished because you feel like a loser afterwards.
You made a
I don't think
point.
anyone talks, real quick, Peter, I don't think anyone, feels like a winner after watching porn. It's more so like, I had this temptation. I tried to resist it for a second because I didn't feel like, wasting 20 minutes or whatever, just scrolling through a bunch of videos and then jerking off to it.
Mm,
But then you do that. So you have a defeated mindset after that. You feel defeated. You got defeated by your emotions. And if you feel like you got defeated by your emotions and you do that on a regular basis, you bet that's going to completely warp
yeah,
the way that you view yourself. You're going to start feeling like a loser, like a defeated
right.
person. Right. So
Well,
go ahead. Yeah.
you made a point in the previous episode about libido and just about pursuing the things that you want that I think fits what you just said very well. If all I need to do to satisfy my physical needs is to go and look at my phone wherever I am, I don't have to interact with anybody, I don't have to have a societal communication of any kind. I don't have to, do anything to receive my reward other than have an internet connection. That's going to limit your desire to put yourself out there. And I think for a lot of guys, at least, that ends up being true. And I don't know, maybe for some women as well. But when you were talking about, the pursuit of things in a natural way because of your physical drive, so to speak, I thought about how many times when you were head over heels for somebody, you went and you did something stupid. Like you just went and rode your bike on the highway just to go meet a girl, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know, try to impress her and hurt yourself or something like that. You drove halfway across the country to meet somebody because you had a physical drive and desire and it pushed you to do something, right? I don't think there is I think there's a disconnect when you have something so easily accessible to you. I think there's a lack of motivation that often comes with that, and I think that's also what ends up making you turn internally and say like, "Man, I didn't earn that. It doesn't feel that good. Now that it's over, it's just me." Like it's like this whole fantasy's been placed in front of you, and as soon as your physical limitations of how long you can go for it is over, the whole thing crumbles. You're just you, your hand, the screen, and you go and you say to yourself a lot of times, "Why did I just do that? That
Mm,
is not fulfilling." And
yeah.
I think especially for someone who is at the point where they say, "Hey, I don't want to do this anymore," that is defeating. That is demoralizing to feel like I just had my brain tell me I had to do this. I needed to release dopamine. It's like going cold turkey through something. You're actually having withdrawals a lot of times. And then you go and you physically release and then you say to yourself afterwards, "Oh, I'm a piece of garbage. Why did I do that? That was not worth it." And then for 5 minutes of pleasure, you beat yourself up for 15 minutes. Now, I'm not saying that
Yeah.
everybody's doing that, but it does place a toll on you and your view of yourself and how you value yourself.
Absolutely. And yeah, it's that. And one other thing, just to go back to the sexual transmutation thing, um, I just thought of a good way to think about it. So imagine life as like an eating competition, right? And you need to have a lot of hunger going into that eating competition to do well. So imagine going into the eating competition of life, but before you go to the eating competition, you just gorge on a bunch of sugary food and stuff through porn, right? All your hunger is gone. Your hunger for life is literally gone, right? You've already used all that up. The dopamine is what drives you to action. You've used all of that hunger up for something that's not even rewarding, something that you just do for yourself, and then you actually lose your ability to give your life energy, the thing that drives you, the masculine testosterone energy, you trying to actually have dopamine through the right things, you lose that in the eating competition of life. Your hunger is gone. It's literally you're eating food before you're eating food and satiating your hunger before entering a hunger competition or a food competition. That's the way I view it. So, so let's actually segue into how this affects your relationships with other people. You mentioned it a little bit before about how just the way that when you see someone, you know, performing sexual acts, like you detach yourself. You're just like, well, that's not a human being. This person on the other side of the screen is just there to make me feel good. They're not an actual person, right?
Well, I think we're even rationalizing that more than you ever do when you're watching. You're not even thinking about that. It's not even on your brain's radar that that is a person, because you're really just driven by what you want from them. I don't think you're actually intentionally saying you're not human.
Yeah.
But that's what you are doing by, let me put it this way. That hot girl you saw at the gym, if you went up and did what you do watching porn in front of her, that would not be acceptable, right? That's not a normal thing to do in front of, if it's a person, right? But if they're not a person and they're just something like a slot machine or something else, you want it, you take it.
Yeah, and that's absolutely going to really affect the way that you view people. You view people as, okay, well, does this person give me some sort of pleasure or advantage, right? That's why porn use, when it becomes chronic, and you brought up a good point there. You're not actively thinking about it. The science of psychology does show that, you know, our emotional brains basically dictate about 95% of our actions. Only about 5% is our conscious brains, because, you know, the conscious mind, the conscious brain is our forebrains, the prefrontal cortex, the neocortex. But in relation to the rest of the brain, the unconscious, the more emotional mind, it's very, very tiny. But it's also the thing that dictates a lot of action. So if you are constantly giving this kind of feedback to your brain of dehumanizing other people just through the very act of what you're watching, you're naturally going to start kind of acting in those ways as well. And a lot of times you can see that translate over to the bedroom, for example, right? Apparently, I saw a TED Talk once of this lady who's anti-porn herself, and she was basically saying that there's evidence showing that sexual acts in the bedroom among large populations is getting a lot more aggressive and abusive as a result, actually, of unhealthy porn watching habits. And I think this is a good way for us to segue into talking about the societal effects of watching porn. So do you have any views on that we can kind of springboard off of really quick, in terms of, you know, because we talked about how it affects you, your relationship with yourself, how it affects your relationship with others within your life specifically. So now let's kind of talk about the societal implications of the fact that because society is made up of people, right? So if it's affecting you, it's affecting a bunch of other people probably in a similar way as it's affecting you. And then it's also affecting people who aren't addicted but you interact with, and it just affects society as a whole because of that. Yeah.
Somebody in your life has an addiction and they decide to have an intervention for that person. Everybody comes and they say something, how it's been affecting them, right? And you kind of ambush them and you tell them, at least this is what happens in the movies, at least, right? They say, I haven't been part of an intervention myself, I have to admit. But they say, hey, Kevin, you know, you're such a great guy for this reason and this reason, but your addiction is causing you to be like this, and I can't pursue my relationship with you, and it's affecting you in this way, and it's affecting me in this other way. So you're absolutely right. What you do in a bubble does not just stay with you in a bubble, because it affects how you look and treat and act towards other people. And I think when you're talking about the subconscious mind, the way that you think of other people, even if you're not physically saying it or presenting it in some way, it will come across. It does come across. And how much you care for other people and how much you listen to what they have to say and your empathy. And I think that's one of the biggest things you can see within our society is there's a very real lack of empathy. Terry Crews is a former professional NFL player, bodybuilder, and a pretty successful actor, and an incredibly big advocate for anti porn. In fact, he's talked extensively on many different shows and topics, YouTube included, about his own personal journey through porn addiction and how it's almost ruined his life. It almost destroyed his marriage and his relationship with his wife and his kids, too. And so he was on the podcast Consider Before Consuming. And one of these things he said on that podcast, really, he was breaking down, emotional about this. He's talking about in his NFL career, there's kind of this culture of going out and bonding with the brothers at strip clubs. And he was talking about how, well, for me, if I was going to watch something like that, I'd rather do it in the privacy of my own room because he watched a lot of pornography. But he'd go out and do this to bond with the men. And, you'd watch this woman go up and strip on a pole, and you'd be looking at her and say, man, she's so attractive. And like, man, that's really hot. And then she'd come down and she'd recognize a bunch of NFL players and come over and start talking to them and tell them about like, oh yeah, this is, I'm making money for my kid and I got to do this and that. And the reaction, the way he says is he's like, whoa, no, don't tell me that. I don't want to know that because now all of a sudden you're a person. I was just thinking about you in a totally different way. You've totally destroyed this fairy tale that I've made. You're a mother and you've got a kid and you need to go pay groceries and that's why you're doing what you're doing for me? Oh, that's not hot.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, because rewinding what I said earlier, society is basically just you and a bunch of other people who are just like you all kind of interacting with each other, and people not like you, but we're all humans at the end of the day. So right. The best way to change society, and because clearly this is affecting a bunch of people, and the best way to do it is to change your views on yourself, the way that you view other people. If your views of yourself are affected via your porn watching habits, at the same time you're dehumanizing other people for your own pleasure, first of all, that makes you feel crappy about yourself. You're going to project that onto other people with your new unconscious way of viewing other people as just objects for your pleasure, right? Mm. And that's going to completely warp society as a whole. Think about how much more introverted people are in the sense of how shy people are, how conflict averse people are in society nowadays because they shut themselves in. They shut themselves in to seek pleasure from life. And it's so much, and when a lot of people are doing that, when you go out in society, when you go out in life, like people aren't going to talk to each other as much, right? It's it's something that's hard to measure, but like in general, people are much more shy because they can live a pleasurable life being a shut-in. And when that happens, and collectively so many people are just being shut-ins and just not interacting with each other, that's going to change your views on how you treat other people. You're naturally only going to treat other people as, well, because, I'm just going to see if I can seek pleasure from you because I actually find a lot of pleasure just being alone, watching porn all day. Right? Well, and naturally because of that, the way that you treat other people, the way that collectively we all treat each other can be affected significantly.
Here's another aspect of that, I think, as well, is that should relationships be considered transactional? And what I mean by that is it as simple as you have something to offer me? I enjoy being around you, and therefore I want that, and I'm offering you back something, the enjoyment of my company. Potentially, you could make that argument, but I would say that a true friendship would require a little bit more than that, because what happens when you're no longer fun to be around? Do you just stop being friends? Potentially, but a deeper bond there is required in order to say, like, hey, you're asking me to help you because your car just broke down. That's inconvenient for me. That's not fun for me. But if you can think of your best friend, chances are you'd probably do that for them, right? Even though that's not fun. Relationships with other human beings are not supposed to be purely a matter of transaction. It's not a unit of commerce. And the same thing is even more true when it comes to a romantic partner or your son or daughter if you have kids. And yet, I think we see more and more in society this idea of what do you have to give me? If I'm not feeling fulfilled because of what you have to offer, you have less value to me. And I think that is, you can't just throw it all on porn, but it's a part of the problem. I really do believe it. If you're so constantly thinking about what do I need? An instant gratification. That's another element of this. The culture of instant gratification that porn breeds. And that's before we even get into the real weeds, I think, of this story, Kevin, because the porn industry is one of the most nefarious industries you can imagine. Not only are they targeting and trying to get people to watch porn at a young age, I believe, but they're also not holding anybody accountable for what they post. And that's what we're really seeing in the news recently, is the amount of people who are being trafficked and then posted to major porn websites like Pornhub is staggering. And the level of either just total, like, I'm trying to think of the right word, just negligence versus willful ignorance of what's going on, both from the industry and from consumers, is very troubling.
Absolutely. It's very, very troubling, man. And yeah, as you can see, guys, like that's kind of the from a moral, ethical standpoint, your relationship with yourself gets damaged through porn, your relationship with others just within your life gets damaged. And then because of that, society as a whole, right? If a whole bunch of people are being affected the same way you are, more specifically, hundreds of millions of people per day, right, mostly men, then that's going to affect society significantly. And
it's going to affect how men treat women.
Yeah, and how men treat men too.
Are you talking about
women treat men sometimes?
The prevalence of something like the Me Too movement comes about because of the objectification of pornography.
Yeah, man.
If you're watching people just take what they want from women whenever they want and having the women give it to them with a smile on their face, and you wonder why some men are so obtuse that they just go and try to physically take what they want from an attractive woman, that's it right there, if you ask me, friend.
Absolutely. All right, so based on that, I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up this particular topic, to go into the next segment. Do you want to kind of give a little recap of what we talked about and then lead us into the next segment?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really talking about who is affected by porn, starting with the personal, right? Because everything starts with ourselves. And then how that transmits to others, your relationships with your siblings, your parents, your friends, and then branching out from there, society as a whole. And it's really hard to distinguish these from each other. It's because it's holistic. The way you treat yourself projects to others, projects to the rest of society. And porn really affects everything because of that, the umbrella that it's under. And that's really what we talked about in this section of the podcast. And coming up next, all right, we've looked at it. Porn is a problem. We looked at the numbers. We looked at who it's affecting. We looked at what it's doing to your brain. But, okay, I admit it. How do I know, though, if I'm addicted? That's coming up next on the Fapstinence podcast, where we're going to be talking about freedom from porn.